Well, hello and welcome for joining us today for our first of our many conversation series for us, by us, liberating women, conversations amongst precarious women. So I want to thank everyone who joined us today that's on. We'll just give a little, we're recording, so definitely turn off your camera or rename yourself, but we'll be posting this on the Coyote site. So thank you so much for joining us. My name is Sheree Cruz. I'm one of the co-founders with the Formerly Incarcerated Union here in Rhode Island. A little about myself. I come from 3 generations of incarceration. Both my parents, my mother gave birth in prison. I myself was pregnant while held on pretrial, and all of my siblings, and then my my son. So definitely this is something near and dear to my heart, especially in regards to specific to the criminalization of women here in our state and across the country. And I know everyone here also cares about that issue too. So thank you so much for being here. And we really wanted to create a space that was for us, by us, those of us who've been directly impacted, to really center the conversation around us and our experiences and really uplift our voices as we continue this every month. We'll be having it the second Sunday of every month, 5 to 6 p.m. You can find the information on Coyote RI Facebook page to go back for updates and invites for the link to join us. So thank you again for being here. I also wanted to, today we'll be talking to Bella Robinson with Coyote Rhode Island. And Coyote is a grassroots social justice network dedicated to the fundamental human rights of sex workers and their communities, focusing on ending violence and stigma through education, community building, and advocacy. Thank you so much, Bella, for being here and taking this time and this space to really uplift the voices of women directly impacted, the issues that are important to us, and really underscoring the importance of what is happening in the criminalization of women here in our state and our country. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for joining us and helping with everything. I love the fact that both of our advocacies have so much in common and so many root causes that are the same. So it's been really inspiring and refreshing to have someone to work with as passionate as you.
Thank you. Yeah, we see a lot in Rhode Island, right? I mean, from sex work to criminalization of parents, whether it's substance use disorder, the criminalization, again, with parental separations, we hear about it at the border, which is bad, but it's happening every day too, to primary caregivers right here in our own state with incarceration. So those are just a few of the things that really we want to uplift those women's voices of being directly impacted in that regard. So definitely, yes, I love the passion and the fight in you as well, Bella. So thank you. So I guess with that being said, tell us a little bit, Bella, about some of the current initiatives that Coyote Rhode Island is working on.
Okay, well, over the last couple of years, we did a lot of research. So we know when you want to research any population, you actually have to engage with them and ask them questions. So if I was going to go interview farm workers to see their conditions, I would need to go interview them. And when it comes to the sex industry, most people only focus on trafficking or street-based workers, which only make up not even 15% of the industry. So we've done a lot of surveys over the years. We've networked with several other sex worker groups to make sure we weren't forgetting something, how reframing questions. We've got all this data. We're writing an ebook. And we also are working on a legislature level. While our dream is to be decriminalized, like we were prior to 2009, we kind of understand that even if we get decriminalized, they're going to continue to take it away. It's going to be kind of like abortion. Like right now, remember we passed reproductive rights less than 2 years ago, and now there's 6 bills at the State House trying to limit our access to abortion already. So this never ends. So we consider some of these steps harm reduction steps, legislation. Even if it's not full decrim, if it's reducing harm and creating safety, we consider it a stepping stone to that. We also do a lot of outreach. Prior to COVID, we were doing regular street outreach. We had a spa outreach team that was trained and had material in Korean and Chinese that would go around and visit the local spas. We do a lot of educational. I have the great pleasure of working with academics. Lily and Lily are both academics that'll probably be interning with this summer. So it's just been, to me, educating the next generation who are going to be legislatures and policymakers is what we need to do to gain our rights.
Wow, yeah, definitely sounds like 6 bills working on that. That's great. And we dropped in the chat an article from Uprise around the legislation and the priorities. If you're watching this later, we'll definitely put it in our Facebook page in the chat as well, those same links, just so you can see the bills that Bella is talking about. Again, these are to reduce harm against women and to make sure, you know, that we can start to build a more just Rhode Island here for women here in the state. So definitely that's incredible, Bella. I guess you talked about some of the bills. Who are some of the supporters of those bills?
Well, Representative Williams was the one that introduced our study commission bill, which is called H5250. And we had it in 2019. It was 5354, didn't get out of committee. But there's a great book called Taking the Crime Out of Sex Work, New Zealand Sex Worker Rights to Decriminalization. And this is exactly how they did it. They created a study commission of sex workers and social workers and Department of Health and police and all these different people. So we've created it where Coyote gets a seat, Brown gets a seat, the ACLU, Amnesty International, the Health Department, the AG's office, there'd be 3 or 4 sex workers. So we can discuss the data and draft policy recommendations to send back to the House. And because this is a House resolution, it doesn't even need to get through the Senate. If it gets out of committee and the House votes yes, and there's not even $1 of funding tied to it. So think about it. Why is it stuck in committee 2 years in a row? It's not costing, they're not doing any of the work, but we're going to keep trying. So the other one we have, Senate Bill 249 and House Bill 6049 is basically a bill that says if a peace officer engages in sex with someone detained or in custody, they're going to go to jail for 3 years. And this includes cops and probation officers and COs and park rangers and fire marshal, anyone that could possibly have the power to threaten to put you in jail. Because while the anti-trafficking movement says, I can't consent to do sex work because I'm poor, somehow they don't seem to see the issue of a cop threatening to take you to jail, which to me is kind of like holding a gun to your head. You're going to do what you have to do not to go to jail. And we've seen this in recent years spill off into ordinary women. Remember the Oklahoma cop that got, what was it, 267 years? He preyed on like 20 women or something. We also have an immunity bill, House Bill 5467, again, was Representative Williams introduced this, that basically gives people involved in commercial sex activity immunity from being charged with prostitution-related charges if they're trying to report a crime or being a witness of a crime. And they did this out in California with Senate Bill 233 a couple of years ago. And it makes sense that that's our main problem with criminalization. First, it sucks being arrested and going to jail. But second of all, we cannot report violent crimes. And these predators continue to go off and abuse more people. And sometimes that spills off into people that aren't in the sex industry. And the last bill is new from Senator Mack, which is Senate Bill 771, which is basically asking for buying and selling sex to be a civil citation and not an arrestable offense. And it would also stop judges from mandating arrested sex workers to STD testing, because if you notice, the clients are never required to do this, just the sex worker. And in public records up in Alaska, we found someone's HIV status in public records because they were, we have HIPAA laws to protect us from this, and then the judge overrules the HIPAA laws and does it anyway. So yeah, those are the bills we have this year.
Wow, yes, it sounds like a lot of great work. I mean, if they pass, to really start to reduce some of the harm and some of the things you shared, I mean, being able to overrule HIPAA and showing your medical records and these things like that, or law enforcement, or someone who has the power to really take your freedom away and put you in a cage has this, power to kind of do what you want, and having these bills are important to really start to humanize, because really that's dehumanizing women, right? And so this is a great thing that these bills really need to get support, and more voices of those who've been directly impacted by many of these things, who I know you shared some of those stories about. We really need to center and highlight those, but also protect them in doing so, right? And make sure they can get their stories heard.
And another interesting fun fact, so in New Zealand, it's called doxing to out a sex worker's legal name, because how sex workers and strippers, we all have stage names, right? And actually, there was a woman that was charged and fined. It's a criminal offense. It's because she doxed another sex worker, and she was arrested and ordered to pay $500 restitution or something. And think about here in the United States, when they arrest us, they put us on the news and tell people where we live in our legal name, so crazy people can come harm us. So New Zealand has really, they also did a 5-year review of how things were going. They only had one underage sex worker trafficking case. I think 89% of sex workers felt more empowered and safer. And the only problem is, in New Zealand, even if you have a work visa, you're not allowed to even be a dancer, nothing to do with the sex industry. So they're seeing the only violence and exploitation that's happening is with migrant workers, because they're the only ones that still have no protection under decrim. So that kind of goes to show that any form of criminalization, even the licensing schemes, we regulate it. Then we have to police who's licensed and who's not. And most of Australia is either legalized or decriminalized, because they realized it was the only way to take the corrupt police out of the equation. Imagine that.
I definitely want to invite anyone who's joining us too, if you had a question, if you wanted to drop it in the chat or raise your hand, please do so. Just to throw out, if I didn't say it in the beginning, because definitely this is important stuff that I was talking about, and I want everyone who's joining us to have an opportunity to ask a question, or if there's a topic or something that isn't being addressed, that we need to hear more voices on what's happening, and to really, really improve on those protections. So thank you. Wow, Bella, it sounds like a lot going on. I mean, and I'm sure there's a lot more, to come. So I guess, why is decrim important? I mean, we understand, the criminal record, the discrimination. I mean, you touched on a little bit of that. Is there, some more you want to share about why it's so important to decriminalize?
Well, first of all, it's child custody. So in Nevada, they have brothels that's legal prostitution, and you have to get an FBI fingerprint back check. You have to get a work permit every 90 days for each of the brothels. You have to get weekly testing. You have to live at the brothel. You have to turn over half your money, pay $20 a day in rent, and then pay taxes. So think about if you're working there and you're 19 or 20. So what happens when you're 28 and you're getting divorced? Who do you think's getting custody of the children once he tells the judge, used to be a legal prostitute in the Nevada brothel? We've even seen cam models and strippers fired from jobs, lose custody of their children. We had a chemistry teacher who did porn 16 years ago, and her high school student recognized her and she was fired. Recently, we had an EMS worker up in New York that was on OnlyFans part-time, fired because they found out she was on OnlyFans, which is a totally legal job. So you're discriminated in future employment, housing, child custody, and it's really the only thing left in society that it's acceptable to hate on. If you hate on people of color, trans people, LGBT, undocumented, half the country will stand up for them, right? So there's only half the hate. But when it comes to sex workers, it's been ingrained in people that they're bad women and bad women get what they deserve. And the police call us NHI for no human involved. So that's how concerned they are with investigating our deaths or violence towards us if we try to report it. Pretty sad, huh?
Yeah, and when you talk about women, LGBT, trans, I mean, still really, there's a lot of discrimination going on. Even though there are maybe a law that was put on, are they being implemented? Are people still being victimized by being in the industry? So yes, and that's why, even though these bills are great and we get them passed, but we have to make sure that they're being implemented, and we have to keep fighting to make sure people are protected. Especially in this industry, which you had highlighted is just one of those that just isn't accepted. You're demonized, you're inhumanized. So it's really important that we just keep, even after these bills, making them stronger and making sure that they're being upheld. So that's so important. And I mean, you touched on, the stigma, right? And with a criminal record, that's what happens. I know here in Rhode Island, we have public portals and things like that. I mean, here, our women's prison we've got, less than 80 women and at $17 million a year. And many of the women there are for things like sex work, substance use disorder, or some level of substance use, which putting something in your body should be illegal. Like, this is what you're doing. Homeless, being someone who's experiencing homelessness, shoplifting, things like that we spend $17 million here in our state to put a woman in a cage, right? To put women in cages, to separate families, to feed a child welfare system, to traumatize 2 generations. So, I mean, this is another piece that there are many women in the state who have been caged, who have been separated, who were sex workers, and for whatever reason, whether it was a poverty reason, whether it was their choice of occupation, they found themselves in a cage, and their whole life turned upside down, and their families too, their children too. So definitely an important topic. So I guess, like, after sharing that, what are the barriers to decriminalization? I think I touched on a little intertwined, but
that's
what?
an interesting question, because a lot of people seem to think the president or Congress can do something about this. But the fun fact is, Holt versus U.S. 1913 Supreme Court ruling said the federal government cannot regulate prostitution. It had to go by states. So this is why I think they invented trafficking. Think about it. It was always illegal to rape people, force them into prostitution, cross state lines since 1904, right? So we basically gave it a new name. That would be like me creating a bunch of more titles for murder, or, how like grand larceny and you could have a charge and there's 2 or 3 different names, but they've created this. Now, the federal definition of trafficking says force, coercion, or fraud into prostitution, or a minor needs to be involved. Even if a minor's under their own control, they're still a domestic sex trafficking victim. But the states came up with their own definition. And Rhode Island's definition says, if you give me a ride over the state line, you're a trafficker. If you answer my phone, if you harbor, the word harbor means to provide safety, right? Shelter, resources, if you harbor. So while prostitution's a misdemeanor, massaging without a license is a felony. If 2 sex workers share an apartment and work together, they can both be charged with felonies. For promoting prostitution or charged with trafficking. If you have an adult child that lives with you, they could be arrested for a felony living off the proceeds of a prostitute. If you have a minor child live with you, the state can take them away without any proof you're a bad parent. So the list goes on and on about, it's crazy that this is a misdemeanor, but they figured out all these other ways to harm us and basically call us a criminal enterprise. And we saw that with Robert Kraft's case in Florida, when the Homeland told the world this was an international sex trafficking ring from China. And these women were sex slaves. And it turns out only one was undocumented. The rest of them all went to school and passed the state board to get a massage license, which now that they can't even do that anymore, that they've been arrested. They were jailed, put in cages, and fined $31,000 and charged with multiple felonies. they're out of work, they have no income. And where's the sex trafficking run? A lot of times the manager, like I might rent a space, have 2 or 3 other women come work with me, share expense, but I'm also a sex worker. It's not like I'm this madam that's not doing it too. And we can understand, like when it comes to spa work, why women are safer if there's 2, 3, 4 women in the building working together. They're not there alone with the client, right? So all of these things have been done to make it more dangerous and make our lives harder. And actually, I heard a legislature in Canada blurt out one time during a hearing, well, we don't want to make it safer for prostitutes. There you go. Why don't you? And to go back to the one thing that we always hear is, well, would you want your daughter to be a prostitute? Well, if she was, I'd want her to be safe. And most of us parents know once your kids turn 18, you can't make them do anything. So we better hope that we raise them good. And if they do, and my daughter happens to be a sex worker, but she's a legal sex worker, and she didn't become one until she was 21 years old. And she's turning out to be a great little activist herself.
Thank you. Zoe, I saw your hand up. Is that right?
Yes. Sorry. I went to college in Pennsylvania College of Technology at Penn State, and it was in a town called Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And Williamsport was very misogynistic. They stated that the college couldn't have sororities, but they could have fraternities. Because a house with 5 or more women living there was automatically considered a brothel, and they could all be arrested and evicted. And that's still the standing law there.
And that law was probably made, 150 years ago, and it's never been revised. Right. Now, interesting.
Wow, yeah. I was going to say thank you, Zoe, for sharing
that was really interesting. In 1979, prostitution in Rhode Island was a felony. And it was worded that if you had indiscriminate sex, you could be accused of prostitution. So basically, if you had sex with anyone besides your spouse, and that's what Margot and Coyote versus Roberts' claim is, first of all, this is overbroad. Second of all, what right does the state have in the sex lives of adults in private? And 3, you're only arresting the women. 89% of the arrests were women. And the ACLU proved that at our hearing a couple of years ago. And they said, we told you not to criminalize these women 10 years ago in 2009. And you claimed you wanted to protect them. And we pulled all the prostitution arrests for Providence and Pawtucket for 2 years. And what do you know? 89 to 93% of the arrests are the women. That's who you're arresting and putting in cages. Right. So, not that we want our clients arrested either, you know?
Well, I think it's that other side of the coin, right? And thank you for sharing that delicate, balance between, it's like they're still demonizing sex work, but it's like how do they create a victim, right? And obviously, if there's a need for protections for people who are truly being sex trafficked, there's young people, children and things like that. But again, all too often, what happens is sex work gets lumped into that, and this is where all these things start. The criminalization, and they have to, create a criminal, right? So I heard you talk about a lot of laws criminalizing everything around that, and that's, so I hear it a really tricky thing because a lot of people are trying to demonize it, inhumanize women who are in the sex industry. So it's a I could see this, what are these barriers? And thank you for highlighting that, dichotomy, that thin line right there where it is. And I hear that a lot as well. Like, well, they're probably, victims of sex trafficking, but how do you know this? Have you asked them that? Are they actual workers? I mean, are you giving them that opportunity? Or are you threatening them with prosecution to state they're something that they may not be? And that's and we've seen we've seen a lot of that with people who've been sex workers or who are sex workers who they had to make that choice to identify not to be put in a cage. So it's kind of, we've got to really rethink this whole thing and how it's approached and what it looks like, so we can really get to the root of those things that you just highlighted, Bella.
And that is mostly created by Congress. So in 2015, Congress the United States government gave $677 million to nonprofits. And in order to get the money, you can't support decriminal harm reduction or talk to sex workers. Your job is to create awareness about trafficking and host public trainings on how to spot it, asking the community to be vigilantes and call the police, but never to approach the victim, right? Because evil pimps are lurking everywhere. And you're right, if you want to know if someone's a victim, you simply ask them, do you need help? Do you want to get out of here? And I can agree that if you've not been outed and arrested, your family doesn't know, when they're threatening to arrest you and they're saying you're going to be on the news tonight and everyone's going to know you're a whore, or if you're undocumented, you're told you're being deported right now, but if you'll just say you were forced, we can get you a T visa, and then you're deported anyway. We can understand why people, and we're not saying that trafficking doesn't happen, but I've never seen a trafficking case where someone was locked in a basement without a cell phone or access to Wi-Fi. It's usually a domestic violence. You engage with someone that starts to be abusive or controlling, and you can't say, I want you to leave, because they're threatening to tell the world you're a hoe, and you might be arrested, get evicted, and they're going to come take your children. So we give all the power to the predator. And you know, a lot of people believe that you can't have a partner. It's that only men, especially men with dark skin, are pimps or traffickers. And that's silly. We know women can exploit people and abuse people too. And it doesn't matter what your race or your gender is. But even having a safe buddy. So even if I'm not giving you any money and I say, listen, I'm going to go see this client at the hotel. I'm getting there at 9. I'm going to call you at 10 o'clock and let you know I left. So if you don't hear from me, you know I'm at the Marriott in room 102 and something is wrong. And just because I call you to tell you that I'm safe, you can be charged with promoting prostitution and go to prison for over a decade for trafficking. And now they want to create laws that if you sell or give a sex worker drugs, you will now be a trafficker. So the net keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah. Sounds like that compounding just to keep enforcing this, you know,
And I think that's why
criminalization.
they don't want a solution. Because
Right.
if they want a solution, they don't get any more money.
It sounds like the argument giving money to schools when it was, you know, safe sex education or abstinence. And it was like only schools who teach abstinence will be the ones to get the funding.
Right. And we know those are all the kids that are going to get pregnant because we know how good abstinence works. Right.
It's not
Obama cut
realistic.
that funding. He realized that was dumb and Trump gave it back to him immediately. Yep. Yeah. And, you know,
Wow.
we think about this too with our youth. Not only, you know, if we want to solve trafficking, we need the root problem. The more vulnerable you are, the easier it is to exploit you in any labor sector. So we need affordable housing. We need to fix our broken DCYF system. We need to support, you know, poor women, especially poor parents, single mothers. Those are the things that, you know, once you're empowered, it's kind of hard to exploit you if your rent's paid, your kids got diapers, and you have what you need. But rather than do that, I've got a spreadsheet of all the trafficking orgs I found out. I look up their 990s. Almost all the money is spent on salaries, fundraising, offices. Very little trickles down to any services because all they do for the victim after they lie to the media about how they rescued Bella and I declined all these wonderful services they offer. The service they offered me was to dump me at Crossroads. And then they also exploit you to come to their fundraiser and tell your sad story. And they say, Bella, you're too dumb to realize that all those clients raped you. You were raped by 30 or 40 men. Now, meanwhile, I never told anyone no, and I was acting all sexy, right? So they re-exploit the victim for profit, and they promise you all these wonderful things that never materialize, and they leave you back in poverty. And most sex workers return to sex work because living in the shelter sucks, and at least when they were doing sex work, you know, they only got arrested once in a while. They were able to provide for their kids, that lifted them out of poverty. But it seems like they really don't want to lift poor people out of poverty, and not just sex workers. Look at poor people in general. Where's the
Right.
15 an hour? Right?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll just make a comment and go to Zoe. I mean, and in Rhode Island, I mean, the majority, you know, of those living in poverty are single parents, especially single women and women of color, right? Living in poverty. And a lot of times too, have a past criminal legal record, which bars you from employment. bars. So your employment opportunities are also dwindling. Your housing opportunities are dwindling. So really, I mean, these are things we like to say is crimes of survival, right? It shouldn't be a crime, but these are things to survive, based on the structure that was put in place, and then you had to navigate within. So I want to give to Zoe. Zoe had a question or comment.
Yeah, hi. I'm transgender, so I know for a fact that I've participated in a lot of studies, and I've also read a lot of studies because I do transgender rights activism. Yeah, uh, and I found that what is it? 87% of transgendered people have at least one time in their life participated in sex work as a form of income because they can't find other forms of income. It's getting a, I personally, I'll tell my part, I I was let go from Dave and Buster's because I was transgender. And they said I couldn't use female restrooms. They said I couldn't, uh, that I had to somehow hide my breasts that were growing, but I couldn't because they were growing. They weren't just pads or something like that. And I left that company after 3 years, and the only income I could find was sex work, and it was survival prostitution for me. It paid my bills. It allowed me a much better lifestyle than being unemployed, and I don't I don't think it I don't think it qualifies as a necessary evil, but it definitely, there are downsides to it and there are upsides. And but I find a lot of transgender people don't really talk about it very much because it's something that are stigmatized for. There was a study done, and I forget by who, that that surveyed Caucasian males in the United States, and they did like 300,000 or something like that, and that they found that 90% of them thought that MTFs, or which is male to female, transgendered people, they thought that most of them were automatically whores or escorts. They didn't think of them as individual people. They thought of them strictly stigmatized by the porn industry, of course. Not that I'm demonizing the porn industry because I've done that as well, but it it doesn't educate, and education is what a lot of people need for transgender rights to be unanimous. I am thankful that the Republican governor of Maryland, which is the state I live in, about 3 years ago passed laws making it illegal to discriminate against transgender people in forms of employment, education, and housing. It doesn't mean they don't discriminate against you anyway, but if you can prove it, you can get some sort of compensation.
To start.
Yeah, huge. That's right. And Zoe, thank you so much for sharing that, because, you know, when I hear you, like, education is important, right? It's solely lacking. Bella talked about a lot of the money that's going into, you know, orgs for other things. And really, you know, where is the education? You know, again, like, you know, thankfully they passed that law, but is it still happening? Is there education and support around how somebody who's transgender, like, is going through this in employment can actually fight back? Because even though there's a law passed, it's still going to happen until people who are experiencing know how to actually access it, how it's proven, what are the parameters around proving it, right? You know, is it so difficult that you wouldn't be able to utilize it anyway? So it's like, keep making sure that people who are being victimized for being who they are is actually, you know, being able to be implemented, and you are being supported. So it's huge. So I want to thank you so much for sharing that perspective, because these are the things we don't, you know, unless you're in those shoes, you don't know what's happening. And people need to hear that, especially legislators, that this is happening when a bill comes in front of them, that yes, it is, because sometimes they think it's, you know, it's not happening, but it is, and we know it is. Bella, did I cut you off? I know you were going to say
No,
something.
well, I was just going to piggyback off of what you and Zoe just said. So we know that, you know, when we have discrimination laws, that people can still discriminate. So it's really about when there's enough of the community that gets angry and starts supporting it, when legislatures are forced to let things out of committee and change laws, or people start boycotting Chick-fil-A because the guy said he hates gay people and everyone said, screw you, we're not going, right? So that's the kind of public outrage that we can use to back up those laws. But I want to point out that sex workers are not excluded in any hate crime legislation, even in the VA Women's Against Violence Act, discrimination. And we know that the majority of trans women murdered every year in the United States, the majority of them were sex workers, and that's whitewashed out of their memorials because there's just too much. They've already carrying the stigma from being trans. Now you want to add another layer, and while they can see they can get a lot of support for being trans, they can understand there's a lot of hostility about the sex work. So why would you want to attach yourself to it if you didn't need to? So, you know, totally makes sense. Not that it's okay.
Definitely should have your life less mean. I mean, you're a human being, right? And it's like what you do for your profession should not take away from that. And it's like we see these things, and us on this video can see that and know that, but it really does. And I just want to underscore, Zoe, again, like that education piece is huge, because there's a lot of warped thinking around it, and really to dehumanize people for, you know, whatever it is they're doing as a profession. So it's definitely huge.
So
I was waiting for her to come.
Should we go on to talk about the difference between decrim and legalization?
Please.
So under decriminalization in Rhode Island, sex workers could work from home, for spas, for the escort agencies. The spas were not required to have any other license. All the other businesses didn't have. They were all paying their taxes. If the women didn't want to work there, they could walk 3 blocks away and work for another spa. And actually, we even caught the Craigslist killer, because after he killed the girl in Boston, he came to Rhode Island and tried to rob an escort, and she dialed 911 because she was decriminalized, and they caught him before he hurt anyone else. So we know there's 35 to 50 active serial killers in the United States at any given time. Police officers refer to sex workers, runaway youth, homeless people, and drug users as NHI for no human involved. There's not going to be any resources. No one's going to care about our deaths. And that's one of the reasons why we have our December 17th International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. So under legalization, you're creating a licensing. Like in Vegas, dancers have to get a license. They got to get an FBI fingerprint background check. And if they've had a drug charge within a year, they can't be a stripper. And there's no training that goes with it. It's just a scheme so the government knows who you are and they get this registration fee from you. Now, do we trust the government not to purposely leak all our information to the public? Because they would love to do that. No, we don't. And it also allows the police to run around to see who's licensed and who's not. So think about this. We're already criminalized. What more do we have to lose? Why would we purposely go register? You can't take anything away from us. We're criminalized. But I try to point out to legislatures, we weren't criminalized prior to 2009. So now you're claiming we're criminals, and that everyone we know is a gang or a trafficking ring, or, you know, this criminal enterprise. We're just people. You're talking about our friends, our family, our neighbors, people in our community. So we know under Decrim in Rhode Island from 2003 to 2009 that gonorrhea in women was reduced by 40% and rape was reduced by 30% for the entire state. So there's 800 and some odd less rapes. Now, out of all the people arrested for rape in the United States every year, guess what percent of them are convicted? 5%. And we have over 500,000 untested rape kits in evidence lockers. So if the police don't care about domestic violence or rape, what makes you think they care about trafficking? Well, they get a lot of money to pretend to care. And they get to engage in sex act, even penetration to completing. Then they get to take the money out of your pocket and seize it and arrest you and put you in a cage while they're laughing at you, calling you a dirty whore. This even happens if you're left for dead and you call the police for help by a stranger. They're more interested in whether you're a sex worker rather than what the perpetrator and his tag number was, so they could go after this guy. And we're seeing this a lot with domestic violence. So another reason we like our sexual assault bill is we've seen a big increase of cops that go to a domestic violence call and they take hubby to jail. And an hour or two later, they come back and have sex with the victim. And maybe they don't say no because he's in a gun and uniform, he's got a gun, but you know, I got a black eye and I'm pretty sure it's kind of apparent that I'm not horny right now. So, and how is this, you know, dynamic okay? This is why we don't let doctors and psychiatrists and teachers and coaches have sex with people they're mentoring, and because it's just inappropriate. Yeah. So we got a little film. It's a little 4-minute video we want to show. If one of the tech girls can do the magic, because Bella doesn't have those skills.
And as they're doing, thank you for like just highlighting some, you know, these challenges and, you know, intricate parts of how this works and where the money's going. Let's see. Come in.
Yeah, here we go.
Yay.
You're going to love this. It's great.
All right, let me know if the audio doesn't work, but hopefully it should. Let's see. All right.
So this is sex work, the 4 legal models.
We do. We all deserve fair pay for the work we do, and the right to safety, security, and healthcare. But one group of people in South Africa is often overlooked: sex workers. We currently have 4 available legal approaches to sex work. Let's take a quick look. The first is our current one, criminalization. This one's simple. Buying and selling sex or keeping a brothel is a criminal offense. At first, this may seem like a good idea. Sex work is often associated with drug use, abuse, and trafficking. But truth is, criminalization has a devastating impact. It forces sex workers underground, into the hands of drug pushers, pimps, and traffickers. They're targeted and victimized by the police, making them less likely to report even the most serious crimes. And because criminalization perpetuates stigma, even healthcare services may discriminate against sex workers, turning them away when treatment is needed. The second approach is partial criminalization, otherwise known as the Swedish model. Here, sex workers aren't criminalized, but their clients and brothel owners are. This may seem a better approach, as it points the finger of blame away from sex workers. But it doesn't address the stigma, nor the tough conditions where sex workers are still watched and harassed. Clients may become paranoid or abusive, and sex work is reluctant to report abuse or trafficking out of fear of arrest. And laws against brothel keeping mean sex workers can't work together, making their situation even less safe. To top it all off, there's simply no evidence the Swedish model works. The third approach is legalization. This is where sex work and brothel keeping is considered legal, but special laws and licensing are put in place. Surely this seems reasonable. Increased regulations and contact between sex workers, health services, and police can only improve their well-being. However, forced health tests and red tape push sex workers underground. Often, These will be vulnerable people like the homeless, those struggling with addiction, and transgender people. And as sex work still isn't considered a normal job under existing labor laws, sex workers aren't given the same protection other workers in SA enjoy. Finally, there's decriminalization. This is where criminal charges are not only removed, but sex work between consenting adults is treated just the same as any other work. Sex work is brought under our current labor laws, giving workers the protection of basic health and safety, fair conditions of employment, and the power to unionize. The burden on policing costs is eased, and sex workers have the same responsibilities as other working people, like paying tax. And finally, working in organized groups is encouraged, helping sex workers feel safer and more empowered in their communities. At the Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force, we believe decriminalization is the only approach that respects the human rights of sex workers themselves as enshrined in our Constitution. And we're not the only ones. Let's start the conversation today.
I love that because it's short and sweet and to the point, and just really awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna say, anybody had any reactions to that video? If it was your first time or not your first time?
And I hear so often people, but we would support, legalization and, they claim it's about STDs. Well, we've already proven, like we surveyed 1,500 sex workers and only 4 of them had never been tested. The majority of them got tested regularly, had a better condom use than the general public. And I feel like unless we're gonna make rules to govern your free sex, why would I have rules? And they're like, how do we know if you pay tax? Well, how do you know laundromats or any other business pays taxes? And Germany has a thing where the street-based workers can pay $5 for this ticket out of a machine. And if they have that ticket, they're legal for the day. And they actually have these little drive-through things that look like car washes, where there's a panic button and there's a condom thing, and that provides them some safety out of public view where they know they're legal. But part of what we saw in legalizations and that only big brothels had the money to apply for a license. So what they did in New Zealand is you could have up to 3 workers work together, called a brothel, but it's really an apartment, and for a $200 licensing fee. And that licensing fee is not attached to the physical address. And this information cannot be accessed by public records. So it's not, see, right now I can go get public records and find out everyone working at the brothels, or anywhere else, but that's protected. Now, if you have more than 3 workers, you would be a big brothel, you'd pay $500, but then you need a background check to make sure you're not a dangerous person or someone that's exploited people, which makes sense. But in the United States, just because 2 sex workers share an apartment, work together, that's what they considered a brothel and a trafficking ring. So think about it, they're telling the world we're a trafficking ring, and the world really thinks there's these evil men and that we're in a basement. And even think about the imagery on the billboards. You see an 8-year-old white girl with a brown or a black hand over her mouth and she's in chains. And first of all, I've never seen a sex worker that was 8 years old. So it really just creates this hysteria. And they did that in the movie, what was that movie? From the 30s, I forget, but it portrayed a black, Indian-looking black man and a white woman hysteria, and it actually caused so much public outrage. There was a bunch of lynchings because it's promoting these idea that these men are dangerous and they're coming for the white women. And it's, really sad. So while there are male sex workers, basically they get to work with impunity because most male workers are selling sex to other men, and no one cares if a 15-year-old boy is being exploited or abused. They only care about women and girls, supposedly. So this is what I call the fake feminists. the carceral feminists. Which brings us to Donna Hughes.
Oh, well, I wanted to circle back to the video just really quick, and that education piece that Zoe brought up earlier too. I mean, it was very clear to the point. I mean, and this is about human rights, right? And protections and under the law that everyone should have an equal right to. I love the concept too about working in groups. I think for me, with co-ops and other industries, at least for me, when I heard that, I was like, oh, co-ops. Like I could really see, worker-owned co-ops and things like that, having that kind of camaraderie and protection and supporting one another in the industry. So I thought that was really awesome about, something about the video, at least for me, that sparked, and maybe even to keep that conversation going when you were talking about decriminalization, because I think some people say legalization and then decriminalization, not, getting the two. And I thought this video did a really good job of doing that.
And, I remember a couple of years ago, there was a newspaper article somewhere that a lady was a realtor. She, had an appointment to show this home and she was sexually assaulted. And no one came and blamed her. Well, what were you doing alone with the man, right? They were like, oh, you should have a partner when you show homes for safety. And that just showed under the Sweden model, it's also called the Nordic model. Okay, we're not going to arrest the sex worker. But if she works with another sex worker for safety, now she's a criminal again. So do you want to stay safe and be a criminal, or do you want to be legal and die? It's really our only options. And I also wanted to point out that Amnesty International went to 4 countries for 2 years and studied sex work. In 2015, they published a report recommending globally we decriminalize consensual adult prostitution to ensure the human rights of sex workers.
Yeah, definitely jump in. Even though we did a lot of presenting, we definitely want this to be conversation style too. We're definitely, as we're rounding off the hour, hearing comments or even just ideas to move forward. Like I thought about the co-op and I was like, well, that's pretty awesome. I could see that in a bill, like, having things like that as well and protections. But I didn't know.
And
if there was
thinking
anything.
about co-ops, I want to tell you about India real quick. In India, they have 30 or 50,000 sex workers that have organized. And I'm just like, wow. I mean, we're lucky we can get 10 in Rhode Island with the Red Umbrella. And when they started their thing, when a new sex worker is coming into the brothel, the elderly sex workers do this interview with them. So one, they keep people out that are too young or someone that they think is being pressured. And it's a really good checks and balance system because, the way the government, they'd want to put a social worker that doesn't know anything about the topic to tell whether we want to do this or not, rather than ask people. And it's really about who they're propping up as the experts. And I know a lot of people, when I'm online and people are like, legalize, it's like, why are you having an opinion about something you know nothing about? I mean, really, I'm not going to go tell scientists how COVID works. I'm not,
And I think that's the important reason why to center the voices of those who, are doing this work and advocating for this work because they're the ones directly impacted by it.
And I've never met a trafficking victim that tells me criminalization prevented them from being trafficked. I even asked farm workers, because on a farm, if you're undocumented, you could not be paid or lied to, or things could happen, right? And I said, dude, with all these trafficking laws, do you think any of them protect you? And he goes, oh no, if you report any kind of labor abuse or trafficking, ICE shows up on the farm.
Yeah.
So we can see all of these were made to police people, to police borders, and even think about the word trafficking. It makes you think of guns and cartels and drugs and bad men and smuggling and all these things that are really migration. People migrate to work. That's why farm workers migrate. But we're just throwing all these really nasty labels. And you have to admit that the way they packaged it and marketed it was brilliant because people believe it just like they believe QAnon.
No, well, not brilliant anymore, because that's why we're going to attack the stigma around it. and we really got to take that power back and start to talk about, how we do that and how we start to reverse that stigma.
You want to talk about national a little bit?
Sure. And I mean, and definitely around this topic, if anyone who's listening, anyone on, to continue around that, maybe even a stigma, anti-stigma campaign, things around that. We just saw a really great video, but, really coming together and, truly believe, we are stronger together. And, those of us who are directly impacted, those of us who, are closest to that problem, are closest to the solution. So really, thinking about how we can continue this, because that's what the goal of this conversation series is to continue this, bring as many people together and continue to keep growing around these topics that are important to us and that we want to make sure move forward and to protect all of our human rights. So it's so important. And what Bella was talking about, so one of the things, Bella, I know with Coyote and the formerly incarcerated union has been working over the last several months with the National Council for the Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, which includes transgender, LGBTQ, that, around no woman should be in prison. So really, it's a Free Her campaign. So it's something that we've been a part of, and really as a New England coalition. So that's another area too, if anyone wanted to get involved with. One thing that's happening that we're beginning stages of organizing is the Clemency Tour that is coming through all the New England states and here in Rhode Island, where we'll have patches of our women and girls who've been buried in the prison system, whether, they're sick, elderly, punished and survived, whatever it is, highlighting, uplifting their names and asking our governors in each state to really, with a stroke of a pen, to let, women out of their cages. And a lot of times we find, like I said, here in Rhode Island, again, all the money we put into really putting women in cages and separating families. So that, if you had more questions or wanted to join around that, definitely chime in, let us know. And we're really excited about it. I know I'm excited about it, and having that Clemency Tour. I know for us as well with the formerly incarcerated union, we've been working not only with the Clemency Tour, but around parental rights. So the parent caregiver legislation, working with some teams, also supporters and allies, and really, and other, women or parents who've been formerly incarcerated and now their children have been either placed in DCF care or have been really kidnapped, for many of the women who are fighting and families fighting to get their children back. So definitely working on a lot around that, and advocacy to help support parental rights when these things happen, if there is incarceration, and trying to limit that scope of the child welfare system here in Rhode Island, as well as voting rights and other rights that affect people who've been formerly incarcerated or have criminal legal convictions. So those are just a couple of the things. I'll give it, I see Bella. I was going to say, I know Bella, you guys at Coyote have some things going on or upcoming events that you wanted to share.
So one of them, these are in our newsletter. They're also on Facebook. But April 13th from 7 to 8, you have to register. Miss Major's having a Zoom thing through Rhode Island College. I've also put, I'll drop the video link and the password in the chat. So Lily, can you do that from the notes? So because people can watch it, but most people know Miss Major is a trans woman who started advocating in the 60s. She's one of the only people alive that were at Stonewall. She talks a lot about doing sex work and the community being involved in sex work. She had a lot to do with HIV outreach, and it's just really, really amazing. And also on May 1st, from 2 to 5, you also have to sign up for this one too, and it's in our newsletter on Facebook. We're having a celebration of the life of Margot St. James. Margot was the original person that started Coyote in the 70s, when it wasn't real popular to run around in public and say you were a prostitute. And women, Margot used to run a thing called Who, which was whores, housewives, and others meant lesbians. And she noticed that 70% of the women that first went to jail in the United States in the 70s first went to jail around a prostitution arrest. And since then, criminalization on women has gone up 800%. And even in Rhode Island, we saw 71% of those 80 women were arrested for misdemeanors. So those are two really good things. And Ramona, who is our social media guru, created a little memorial video that will be highlighted as a tribute to Margot. And I'm just really grateful, because if it wasn't for Margot, Coyote, Rhode Island wouldn't exist, and none of our work would exist, and we wouldn't be here. And I would like to think that she kind of looks down at us as proud of the work that we're continuing to do, because one thing I do know, there will be the next generation of sex workers. And we want them to be safer and more empowered. We want to leave them a better world than what we left. But we also don't want to leave poor people behind. I strongly believe services should be for all poor people. You shouldn't have to agree to quit being a sex worker, quit doing this. People deserve housing, jobs that pay a living wage, healthcare, food on the table. I don't care if you're a drunk that lives under a bridge, you still deserve to eat and to be housed. And that's one of the things that our legislatures like to do, is to come up with reasons we can ignore homeless people or test people on food stamps for drugs, so we're gonna let their kids starve if they smoke. And all these ways that we can say, you're not important and we don't have to help you, you're something other than us. And isn't it funny how they act like they actually have to take the money out of their own pocket, when there are tax dollars? So we have a right to say how we want our tax dollars to be spent.
Sounds like you got a lot going on there, Bella. So you got, and all the events are in the chat, and if you're listening, they'll be also on Facebook or on the page as well, in your newsletter. Is that what I heard you say, Bella?
Newsletter too.
And I wanted to make one clarification too, that, and if anybody's watching around the Free Her campaign and the Clemency Tour with the Clemency quilt, will be having 3x6, if I didn't say it already, with people's names on it. So if you know anyone who's buried there under the jail, who's been in there without a release in sight, definitely, and there's someone you're corresponding with or who you love and know that are still there behind bars and cages, that definitely reach out, and we can find out if that's something that the person who's being held there inside wants to be a part of. We can uplift their name as well, part of that, and you can represent that person in any state. So this is in every state. I know I said New England, but I know if others are in other states joining us today or watching, that's something you can actually use that platform to help advocate.
And another thing, Coyote's on Instagram at coyote.ri. And every week, Ramona does a flyer on an incarcerated sex worker that we hope the community will start to write. And I can tell you this from being previously incarcerated: mail call is the highlight of the day. And it's very public, because they read the names and you've got to walk up to the officer. So everybody knows who's got somebody, who's got people, and who's got nobody. And it actually creates safety when the COs and people know you got people to call and tell what's going on. But it really is the highlight of the day. So please consider that.
Awesome.
So people can volunteer with just a few minutes of time and the cost of a stamp. So, and I want to thank Lily and Lillian, our great technicians that help pull all of this off. Sheree's a little bit more tech savvy than me, but I'm just like, none of this would happen with I can't even take a selfie on my cell phone. I mean,
this pandemic has given us all newfound skills we didn't know we had.
And listen, always open to new ideas, whether it's around incarceration, whether it's around sex worker safety. Sheree, can you drop your email in the chat for people that don't have it? And
yes, definitely. And I want to, so next time we'll be meeting, and as I had mentioned, we will talk about, forced family separations, due to parents whether have been incarcerated and formerly incarcerated, and we have a lot of women leaders in our union, on our formerly incarcerated union, who've gone through this firsthand, are still fighting to get their children back. So what a way to spend Mother's Day, to honor those parents, those women that are inside, separated from their families, and those who've come home and are still fighting to get their children back. So definitely hope you can join us then on that second Sunday at 5 to 6 p.m.
Thank you all for taking the time to meet with us, and we're hoping to have lots of great conversations in the future. Yes, thank you. Does anyone have any last minute questions? You're like, oh, we talked to Bella.
Or comments, I know. Feedback, definitely share feedback. Those who joined us too, you know, any way we can improve, because, you know, how do we improve unless we get feedback and we hear back just in general in life too, so.
And we did a good job kind of staying on time. We're only a few minutes late, so we did pretty good.
That's a big topic.
It was 4 hours. Lillian, you hung up, and me and Sheree stayed on for like another 90 minutes. And we're like, oh my God, we've been doing this 4 hours. So
it's a big topic. It's an important topic, and that's why we got to keep having these conversations. And I can't wait to hear back, Bella, on how it's going in the legislature, and hopefully get some updates through the newsletter and Coyote of, you know, how that's going, and needs around testifying or putting in written testimony in support of some of these bills. So definitely thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I want to thank everyone for
supporting
being
a lot
here.
of good bills too. You don't give yourself enough credit.
But
you
because there's just so much to do in
No,
criminalization.
like every day it gets bigger and bigger. And you know, I remember the first couple of years, a friend of mine told me to do an annual review because I didn't feel like I was making any progress or doing it. And then I would just go through my date book and make a Google Doc and what I did. And at the end of it, I was like, damn, no wonder I'm tired. That was a lot. So, but thank you. Like they say, it takes a village. It's going to take the community to make change in all of these things. And I think when we get rights for sex workers, we're also going to be strengthening rights for women and many other marginalized groups. It's nice. So this is going to benefit all of us. And I do want to point out one last thing. Sex workers has been diverting money to poor communities for generations. We spend a lot of money. We go get our nails and our hair, we tip really well. We're not cheap people. And we do a lot of volunteering in our communities too. So and just think about all the money the government could be getting if they allowed us to pay taxes legally that could go into public services.
Usually people who've struggled are the biggest tippers. Go ahead, Zoe.
Sorry. I know I've been talking a lot. I apologize.
We love it. Encourage it. I'm so happy.
I wanted to mention something to Bella, that I've started talks with the representative from Maryland.